So there's a few things here, you know, that this has come out of the review that they did on remote learning, that it is important to teach those strategies that pupils need to work independently. And I say, I've taken some of these slides from Kingsbridge Research School, who did a webinar on metacognition and home learning. It's on YouTube, so Google it if you want to look for it. I found it really, really helpful. And like I say, I've nicked some of the slides directly from them. There are some resources that have been specifically put together to support schools at the moment. And one of those resources is this planning framework. And the idea of this is it's tried to take the recommendations from the metacognition guidance report and how lessons and learning sequences should be planned to help to teach and to develop and support the metacognitive strategies in our pupils. How, you know, that guidance report was written for a usual normal face-to-face classroom situation, and how can we try to translate that to the situation we have at the moment? Because this planning framework here is not supposed to be for one session. But within a sequence of learning, however many sessions that is, however that looks in your particular kind of context, the research, you know, the guidance suggests that we should be thinking about activating prior knowledge, explaining strategies, practicing them, reflecting on them, and then reviewing them. And there's one thing to make clear here. When we're talking about explaining here, this is about strategies. This is not just kind of delivering content, I guess you might call it. This is the how you do things. And it's really important. That's where the time goes, because that's the bit that we're not there to help with, right? I mean, the knowledge itself, the bits and pieces can be, you know, given to people quite easily. It's something they can read, but explaining the strategies, that's harder to do. So activating prior knowledge, as Roger said at the beginning, you know, it's really important that knowledge builds on prior learning, that you remind them of what they've done previously that's connected to what they're going to do today. And, you know, there's so many different ways you can do that. It might be, you know, a quiz or just showing them a video. The best analogy someone showed me of this, I don't know if I said it when I spoke to you before, is they were saying that when they watch TV shows, there's those, they always do the catch up at the start of the TV show from the previous episodes, because however big a fan you are, however much you've talked about it over the week, you still want that little bit of a reminder. So that's, you know, that's got to be part of the sequence somewhere. Explaining, again, this is strategies, right? This isn't, you know, just telling people stuff. This is those thinking, why it is that you make the decisions you do, why is it that you choose to do this at a certain point, those things that you know as a teacher because you've done it lots of times but you're introducing for the first time. You know, so for example, in maths you could just show people how to solve an equation or give them instructions, or you could talk people through it. You could elaborate on the steps you take, or you can show a worked example. You know, this one here has two very similar examples here. It shows you how to do it on one side, and then on the other side people are taking it through. So it's just, so the emphasis here is on the strategy, not on the actual kind of this is an equation or whatever. So we've got activate, where we're recapping things. We've got explaining, where we're demonstrating. And for me, this is, if you're going to do your recording, if you are doing any kind of recording at all, this is where the emphasis should be. This is the bit where they need a teacher's explanation. And if you can't record it, you know, this is where elaborating on worked examples, for example, going back to the previous one, you can just write the notes in. This is why I made the decisions that I did at this particular time. That's the expertise that you have as a teacher. That's the nub of what we're doing, and that's the most difficult thing to do remotely. So that, I think, is where a lot of the emphasis has to be, because then after that, well, the practice, you know, there's lots of ways that you can introduce practice. Here I would say scaffolding is really, really important. It's not just a question of giving lots and lots of examples. Think about how those examples are going to look. How much scaffolding are you going to give at the beginning? You know, probably the first few questions that people try, you will give lots and lots of prompts. Get them to use those knowledge organisers, you know, those essay plans that they have, all of those kind of structures that you have in place normally to help them do what they're going to do, and then encourage them to gradually remove that as you go through. And the practice, I think, you know, we probably said in the session before, that's the bit that is so easy to skip over in normal lessons. But we really need to make sure we put enough of this in. And the reflection, you know, reflection is going to be really important here, especially, you know, those most effective learners, they are the ones that will do this without thinking, really. So there has to be some kind of prompt to help the kids that don't do this automatically and it can just be just putting a question at the end of a, you know, I used to quite often on Google form homeworks I used to set, I'd just put a question at the end saying, how did you find this, or which question did you find most difficult, or why do you think you got one of those questions wrong? You know, just those little prompts to get people to think about what they've done and how they'll do something differently. And the review, in some ways, this is going to be the easiest part, as long as we know that we should, you know, that we should be planning it in. There's so many ways of reviewing things, but if we're doing this for a long period of time, you just need to make sure you come back to it at one point. I'm just keeping an eye on the time, but it's worth just showing you a couple of examples that they gave with the King's Bridge. And the point that they made, and I think this is a really good point, that often when they're in the classroom, actually a lot of the emphasis of their time and their effort goes on the actual content, because they know that they're there to physically kind of scaffold things in person if they need to be. But they've kind of flipped it around. They were saying for this, they really think it's going to be a question of, you know, maybe reducing the subject content for a while that you think you would cover in a certain period of time, because actually those strategies around them are going to be so much more important. And in normal life, we skip over these quite easily. In this situation, we really need to make sure that we have that in there. And the example he gave was when he was teaching a poem, you know, he might go through each of these 5 poems in 2 lessons and kind of goes for one and then the next and so on. But in this situation, maybe the thing to do is to do 1 poem and then have a couple of sessions where you're actually practicing and consolidating, because this process is going to be so, you know, important as we go on. We're not there to pick up the pieces for them if things fall, and so sometimes that has to be planned in. And so, you know, this was an example around English and poems, and there was the activation of actually thinking about how we approach them. They'd actually swapped this round next to thinking about, you know, the annotating about why you do things, you know, what the point of all this was, and then going through the process and the worked examples and so on. If you look on the EEF website, there's a few worked examples as well. There's one from English literature, there's a maths one there, chemistry, German. And actually I did this recently with some of the teachers from Norwich and Norfolk that we were talking about metacognition, and these are some of the examples they gave of how they've been kind of setting remote work. And there's a few things that I thought it was really good to kind of draw your attention to. So in this first one here, I think it's really clear that we've got kind of a topic that's going on over a few lessons, but where the emphasis of the recording, the Loom presentation, that's the explanation. They haven't just gone, I'm going to record a lesson where we're going to, it's not, it's about breaking that lesson up into different parts and the Loom being used for specific things. I liked this one as well because that, you know, they recognise that there is a point in having that teacher's voice there, but they've thought really carefully about where that teacher's voice comes in, and it's not just constant and all the time. This one here I really liked because they were talking about the how important it is to break down things into smaller tasks, and this one here again, it's the modeling how to approach tasks as well as the tasks themselves where the focus was. So it's just a few examples of how people have done this, but the framework is there, and as much as anything it's a thinking framework, kind of a checklist. You know, have I put all of these aspects into my remote learning sequence? as I kind of, whatever time period I do this over, have I made sure there's a chance for people to reflect on what they've done before? Have I made sure that they've thought about it afterwards? Have I reviewed it with them? Have I come back to it? And so on. But it's over the course of some time.